and the whole podium thing just kind of like, I'm not, anyways. How did I get here?
Nothing was on television that night.
Pardon me?
Nothing was on TV that night.
Well, how many people know who my father was? Let's see some hands. Okay, how many people have heard on YouTube or wherever the little snippet of his deathbed confession?
Oh, yeah.
How many recognize this voice? I heard from Frank! Remember that? Well, I tried to bring that on the USB key down here, but in the last 10 minutes I was tearing my room apart, and my wife was helping me tear it apart. Going, where is my USB key? My pink USB key that I had my father's little snippet on. We can't find it. Anyways, I thought I got that heard from Frank down pretty well, so the rest is history, because I didn't memorize what he said. But what he said was, generally speaking, some of the most shocking news that he had ever told me. Now, my father and I, despite our differences politically, for one thing, when he was working for the Nixon administration, we were, as a family, invited to attend some White House function. And I was in my militant hippie days, and my black armband, and I was down in the streets of Washington, D.C., protesting against the Vietnam War, which in retrospect was a good thing to do.
Yeah.
And he was very pissed off at me about that. He goes, we're going to see the president, son. I'm like, you're going to see the president, Papa. I'm going to go down and protest. I can't have a son of mine protesting while I work for the president of the United States, son. I'm sorry, Papa, you're just going to have to deal with that somehow. Boy, we just went back and forth. It was not an easy relationship in those days. Not easy at all. But I persevered, I got my way, he got his way, and then the wounds started to heal, and we became, in the last 10 years of his life, very close. Here's my vodka and 7-Up. You know, I've been through a lot of crazy stuff with my family, and I don't know if that's why I drink. It's an excuse, it's a crutch, I don't know. I drink because I like the flavor of it, who knows? I don't know. I tried AA, I couldn't find any of the steps, so my brother said, well, AA is for quitters, and we don't, hunts don't quit. And there was some kind of twisted logic in that. I'm not really sure what it was. It could have been just something that just kind of, came out of his brain in some inebriated state. Anyways, we went through hell together, doing all kinds of things that I won't mention because, check, 1, 2. We're being looked at right now, I'm sure, by NSA, CIA, FBI, SOB, whatever. And, I was 16 years old and I had traveled extensively by that time. Born in DC in '54, moved in 6 months to Japan, where coincidentally Lee Oswald was stationed in Atsugi. My dad was up in that area. First spoken language was Japanese, so by the time I got to Montevideo, Uruguay, where my father was CIA station chief there, I was already a pretty twisted individual, like, speaking Japanese and everybody else is speaking Spanish, but I went to a French school. So this was a planned torture that my parents wanted to put me through for some reason. I don't know what I did wrong, but here, you speak Japanese, we're going to move to a Spanish-speaking country for the next 4 years, and you're going to attend the Lycée Français. So that was a hardship, and I still couldn't figure out how to pay my dad back for that one. But when I was 16, I guess they felt I was mature enough to, hey, I see some friends here. All your friends, actually. They thought I had the maturity, and they were wrong about that too, to tell me what in fact they really did for a living. My father primarily. My mother, her CIA experience pretty much tapered off, although she was still a contract agent and working in the various embassies of the host countries we live in, gathering intel that she was able to have the privilege of stealing or copying, and then giving it to my father as needed. So they were the classic CIA working couple. I think best portrayed by Brad Pitt and Angela Jolie. I don't know, there wasn't all the gun shooting in the house or any of that stuff, but the craziness was the same. Every 2 or 4 years we'd move, boom, we're moving. Oh, well, I'm just now learning Spanish, and getting into my French, and I forgot my Japanese already. But then it was Mexico City, and then it was Argentina, and then it was Spain, then it was US, and so, by the time I really put roots down in this country, I had a really bad stuttering problem, because maybe my brain was going, well, what language is he going to be speaking now, and it just kind of stopped and stuttered. But at 16, my father sat me down and told me, son, the reason we move so much is because I work for the Central Intelligence Agency. I didn't think that sounded very intelligent, but I didn't even know what it meant. So he said it was kind of like the FBI, but in foreign countries. And I'm like, oh, okay, Papa, that's fine, So the State Department whole charade was just a cover, as much of our life had been a cover. And later in years, I realized that just about everything we did and were involved in, including the classic CIA couple, husband and wife, and I felt that like we were children, we're just part of his cover. We don't really mean anything, not really. I mean, we were a necessary part of providing that family image. And so that hurt a little, but, and so everything was quiet until about 1970 when my father left the CIA, and decided to go work for President Richard Nixon. And this was the big talk around our house. I'm gonna go work for the president. And I've never seen my parents argue about anything, never. Never heard a mean tone, a raised voice, but in my basement room, which my father had constructed for me, this is one of the few father-son things we ever did. He constructed a windowless concrete bunker for me in the corner of the basement. And I'm like, it's black, just, you turn the light out and you couldn't see your hand this close to your face, thank you so much. Why am I down here? Everybody, the life of the house is upstairs, and I'm like downstairs, through the office, down through the laundry room, through the basement, beside the maid's room, all the way in the back corner. So I don't know if that was intentional or not, but he used to just love coming into my room at 6 o'clock in the morning with his trumpet. Just practically kick my door open and like, rise and shine, up and at him, saint. And I'm like, oh God, help. So we had a funny relationship. He really helped me with my music. And my feelings of solitude and loneliness. That was good. He taught me that it's okay to be holed up in a dark room in the corner with no windows, no sunshine, and that's okay. You're okay. It's all right. People do that. Okay. Maybe in the CIA when they've been caught, in Korea or something, they do that, but I don't know, in the USA. I have to look at my life in somewhat of a comical term, but getting down to more serious issues here, let's see. So I had never really heard my parents argue, but in 1970, my father and mother, because my bedroom was below theirs, I started hearing the fighting, the arguing, the bickering, and you could feel the whole house was under this incredible tension. And my mother was, number one, she was she was at the end of her rope with my father's infidelities. And this was something I knew nothing about until that time when my mother started confiding things in me. And the other issue was working for President Nixon. My father had promised after he retired from CIA that he would never again indulge himself into covert activities. He would not continue working undercover for any bureau, so that was the promise he made. And so when Charles Colson, President Nixon's counsel, and my father, who were both alumni from Brown University, got together, it was decided that President Nixon had work was all that was needed to be done in the White House, and this became the plumbers unit. But my mother was furious. She said, Howard, you promised, you promised, you promised, you promised. Well, the president taps you on the shoulder, what are you supposed to do? Well, I guess you could say, no thanks, I've given you 30 years of my life already. Time to spend a little time with my family. You know, he could have said that. But I think the big thing about CIA people is their egos. And this is the big thing about people in positions of power, is their egos. They've got to have this. My dad was like an adrenaline junkie. Instead of parachuting from planes or whatever, he wanted to overthrow countries. I mean, that's a normal ego, you know, adrenaline junkie thing, right? You gotta like, well, this week it's gonna be Guatemala, or next week it's gonna be Nicaragua. And let's see, what countries are on the line for the next couple of years we need to overthrow? Send me there and we'll get it done. So he was the CIA's #1 guy in the Guatemala project in 1957. He created the false radio. You know, in the old days of radio when they used to have like all the sound effects and all that stuff. Well, I can just see my dad with the microphone creating the sounds of planes and drums bopping. You know, he was probably like rattling, you know, metal sheets of metal for thunder and going like this because they believed it. They thought there was a huge Air Force bombing, and the president ran. He booked. He split, and that country now fell to the United States. And so he was the go-to guy. So they put him in charge of the Bay of Pigs. Well, that didn't go so well. That wasn't as easy. They had miscalculated and they misread the veracity of the Cuban people to entertain another coup after they'd spent years trying to get rid of Batista, who was a very corrupt Cuban politician in bed with the mafia and all kinds of things. And it's funny because a lot of the Watergate people came from that Bay of Pigs thing. Frank Sturgis was in charge of some of the casinos, picking up the money for Batista. Bertie Barker, also known as Macho, this guy you think could be like a full-time Santa Claus. You know, he was short and dumpy, and he had, you know, just a very family-loving Catholic Christian guy. You'd never think he was head of Batista's secret police. So these are the people that were friends and used to come over to our home in Potomac when Watergate started building up to what it eventually became, which was just a huge mess, both nationally and for our family. And that was 1970. So throughout the 70 and 71, my dad was making trips, burglarizing Dr. Fielding's office down in Los Angeles. Considering ideas of murdering Jack Anderson, who was a columnist for the Washington Post, an investigative journalist that Nixon hated. So many things. Kidnapping prominent Democrats, feeding them LSD and putting them on a houseboat filled with hookers and two-way mirrors with, right, am I right? Yeah, with mirrors and film to blackmail them. I mean, it sounds just, what's wrong with that, you know? Give me LSD and I'll go to a houseboat full of hookers. You know, what's the problem with that?
That's
torture. I'm totally kidding. But, and so they had this massive thing called the Gemstone Plan, and it was all the jewelries, you know, there was ruby, diamond, emeralds, sapphires, you know, all the way down until they ran out of stones, and then they had the precious stones. And he and Gordon Liddy, who was one crazy guy, had developed all these points to infiltrate the Democratic Party. They were going to have chase planes follow the Democrat planes and eavesdrop while they were in the air. They were going to send their Cuban mercenaries to the Democratic Convention to disrupt things and all this stuff. So, I mean, I could see why that would sound like an attractive bunch of things for a guy like my dad to do, since what he'd been doing before for the CIA was basically that on a much larger scale. And so Watergate happened. He was arrested. He turned himself in, actually. His crew, his team was arrested. James McCord, the 4 Cubans, and I believe Gordon Liddy surrendered as well at some time. My mother was in Europe at the time, in England, going on vacation with my sisters and my brother. I was alone at the house with my father. And rather than come barreling in my room at odd hours blasting his trumpet, one morning in the wee hours he shoved the door open, flicked on the light switch, and said, get up, get out of bed, meet me up in my bedroom, no questions. And I'm like, well, okay, something's happening here. He looked really upset about something. I didn't know what was going on. But I didn't ask any questions. So I went upstairs. He had these 2 large suitcases full of eavesdropping, camera, devices, wires, and all this kind of stuff. And he said, go in the kitchen, get some spray cleanser, and some paper towels, and wipe everything down. We got to get rid of this stuff. I guess it's stuff he had brought back from the lookout station across from Watergate. Anyways, make a long story short, I cleaned it all up. He was on the phone making connections to do something for his team, which had been arrested. And we got in his green 71 Firebird and drove out to the canal locks, the C&O canal locks, and I helped him dump these suitcases into the water, which they probably are still there. Over the next couple of days, I helped him transfer money. I remember one assignment he gave me was meet him down in Georgetown, which is a little subdivision of Washington, D.C., and meet him at the Riggs Bank down there, and in the safety deposit room. So I did. And he produces a large manila envelope, a large one, stuffed with something. He goes, this is cash. I want you to stick it down the back of your pants here, cover it up with your jacket, and then take the longest twisted route back home that you can, because you're going to be being followed, more than likely. And I'm like, gulp. You know, keep an eye on the rearview mirror, and if you notice cars that are the same, just try to lose them. And I'm like, thinking, Papa, I'm a 17-year-old hippie with $250,000 stuffed down my pants, and I'm watching out for the FBI or whoever to follow me, and I'm supposed to lose them. This is not, I'm demonstrating against the war here. I'm not, this is not a spy thing for me. I'm not part of that. But who else was he going to rely on? And this actually was a wonderful thing, because it gave me the first opportunity in my life to do something that my father would be proud of. Right? Run, evade the government, hide the money. But he needed me, and it really was the first time I felt that I was actually doing something that he could count on, and I was going to do it. I didn't care. I didn't realize at the time that I could be arrested for being an accessory to one of the biggest political crimes in the history of the United States. But what's a kid to do, anyways? So I did all that. And for the next couple of days before my mom flew back, I helped him dispose of other evidence, typewriters and things. Famous typewriter that he wrote. I have a piece of lint on my here somewhere, or it's my mustache. I don't know. The typewriter that he wrote the DM cables, the forged DM cables, which implicated the John F. Kennedy in the assassination of Vietnamese President Diem. That was his old royal typewriter down in his office, and he said, "Here, take this across to the Griffiths property, our neighbor's property, and dump it in their pond." And so, under a full moon, I toted it in a laundry sack and went down our long, lonely gravel driveway. Our house was called Witch's Island, by the way, and it was a creepy-looking place. Lots of unkempt acreage and trees with bony fingers, and this was a particularly scary night. I don't know, my adrenaline was up, so I said sure, and so I took it across the street. And they had this huge property where my mother and I used to go horse riding for hours at a time. That's when we really got close and found out a lot about each other. And I was so grateful for that too. And maybe if Watergate hadn't happened, perhaps we would have never come together as we had, because under the state of stress that our family was under with the FBI following us they launched the greatest manhunt in the history of the United States at that time to look for my father, and he was in his house. I guess the FBI is not doing that much better these days with the whole Hillary thing, you know. It's like, you got 650,000 emails, and it looks pretty bad, but we're going to give her a pass. Okay, that's fine. And then my mom came back, and she took up the reins of being my dad's helper, and the ironic thing about it is that she was planning to leave my father upon her return. She just had it. It was when she heard about Watergate, everything she warned him about. I remember her saying, Howard, these people are using you. They know you're a patriot. They know you will do whatever it takes for the United States government, for the presidency, for the security of our country. They're using you for their personal needs. This is not a CIA operation. That's a national security operation. This is something else. This is Nixon's kookiness, his paranoia, and it was. And it's sad because helping my father, it killed her, and she was the go-between for the money that they were blackmailing. Well, to everyone else it was blackmail. To my parents it was money owed because an operation had gone south, and the team members of the operation, their families needed to be taken care of. I mean, Cubans had big families. We had 4 kids in our family, and bills had to be paid. Lawyers had to be paid. Medical bills, school bills, private school bills, rent, mortgages, all that stuff. And this was an agreement between my dad's superiors and my dad, which he had passed along through to the people that worked for him, Cubans and McCord and those guys. And so while they were blackmailing Nixon for money, it was so funny though, because when my mom got back, she goes, "Well, what's been going on around here?" Shit. What can I tell you? Well, let's see. There's probably a couple $100,000 in an envelope way up in the air conditioning heating ducts, way up there. See the little nylon string you could pull, and that will fish it out. So we went down there. She's like, "Oh my God!" Well, she gave me a nice stack of I don't know, it was like $6,000 or $7,000. She goes, "Here, get out of town." And so I did. I'm like, "Well, where do I go? What do you mean?" And she said, "Buy a car and go with your girlfriend and take a tour of the national parks. I don't care where you go, just you gotta leave. This is if something bad's gonna happen here." And I did. When I came back, Watergate had not gone away. It had just gotten worse. Now the press was all over the house, like they do nowadays. Cars on the streets, and anybody that came in and out, there was a rush, and it was hard to get stoned and be a hippie and play music in my rock band when all that was going on. It's like, no, out of my face, Woodward and Bernstein. Shut up. I'm sorry. But then everything changed when my mother died. When she got on that plane that was on its way to Chicago. And then my dad was in prison. We were alone in the house. My sister, my brother David, who was only 9. And then William F. Buckley, who was my godfather, came with some goons and said, "We're locking up the house. We're selling the house. You kids have to go." And they grabbed my little brother David out of my sister Lisa's arms and shoved him in the back of a dark sedan. And she was hysterical. My sister Lisa was. I was shouting at Uncle Bill Buckley, and the goons were, looking menacing and threatening, and I think from that point on, I knew that this was really a bad thing. This was going up beyond anything that I had ever. I couldn't even imagine something like this ever happening, and my mom wasn't around to protect us, and then it just seemed to just sort of. I never saw my brother for 6 or 7 or 8, maybe 10 years after that, he was taken down to Miami to live with his godfather, who happened to be in the cocaine business. And at the age of 12, my brother was so addicted to cocaine that he never really recovered. And I really feel bad for him because he was too young to really remember my mom, but he has a scar about something that he can't remember. I don't think that's really fair, you know. And so I tried to do my best to, you know, I found all these old pictures of my mother, and I made copies and I sent him, and he just called me. And this was only a couple of years ago, and he cried to me on the phone. He goes, saying, "This is so beautiful and wonderful. I wish I could remember it." He had no memory of my mother. I mean, it's just not fair that he had to be ostracized from the rest of the family, as I was. But I was making decisions on my own. David was just, you know, he was just collateral damage. And that's going to be the subject of a book I'm working on, the collateral damage of families and children from the CIA and the FBI, children of assassins, I was thinking of calling it, you know, because there's just a huge problem there that needs to be looked at and needs to be dealt with. What are these kind of agencies doing to children and families? You know, sending their parents out to do these things, and then, you know, everything goes, you know, FUBAR, and then what? What do the kids do? I went on drugs immediately. I'm like, you know, I'm out of here, and I'm going to start smoking weed. I'm going to do something else, you know. And it just elevated from one drug to the next, and I didn't really realize that was what it was all about. But so my sister and I came across this Rolling Stone article here. I'll pass it around to you guys. But it's interesting because Rolling Stone, right at that time, my dad was in prison and my mother had just passed away. They had an article called, written by a noted Chicago investigative reporter, Sherman Skolnick. And yeah, Sherman, great guy. And my sister and I read this article in Rolling Stone, we were fond of Rolling Stone, and we wrote this short little letter that said, "We are angry and horrified that you would resort to a cheap journalistic trick of sensationalism by printing the article by Sherman Skolnick. He has no basis for his accusations, and as we understand, he was laughed out of the National Transportation Safety Board meeting. He has no right whatsoever to fabricate wild theories concerning the crash of United Airlines 553. Our mother, Dorothy Hunt, was neither murdered nor was the plane sabotaged. If you realize the agony and humiliation this filthy article put us through, you would have thought twice about publishing it. Our mother is dead and cannot defend herself, so have the respect and consideration to let her rest in peace. Lisa and St. John Hunt, Potomac, Maryland, October 11th, 1973. Well, they sent a lady out who was actually a very nice person. Her name was Julia Cameron. She lived with us for the 2 weeks that we had left in the house. Lisa and I were packing things up as best we could, and came out with a story called Life Without Father. And that's me here with the blue jeans and the long hair. That's my sister Lisa. There's our little house sign, Witches Island. So here, these are very, very old. Here's another one here. Gotta be careful with this. The only good thing about that was that Paul McCartney was on the cover, and I knew that he saw the article too. And I'm like, Paul, looking at my article, cool. So, you know, try to find a little bit of humor or niceness in even the darkest moments of your life is what really is important. And that was the end of it for me. Done. Finished with Watergate, finished with my family. No family left to finish with, but I'm done with everything. Went to a farm in northern Wisconsin, played with my band, and that was the end of it. Eventually time passed and time passed. But as time was passing, I noticed, I moved to California, and then I saw one afternoon a poster on a telephone pole showing the three tramps, and saying this is one of the earliest lectures at SF State, San Francisco State University, given by noted civil rights activist and ex-comedian Dick Gregory. I believe he was going to be on the panel. CIA killed JFK. And there's my dad's picture. And I'm like, what now? You know, what is going on, Papa? He had just been released from prison, of course, because of Watergate. He was no longer a covert operative. He was so overt, it was like ridiculous. He was like, you know, everybody knew his face. Oh, there's that guy, you know. And my father never, and I really never discussed it, although he sent me a couple letters saying if we're ever brought before a Senate board of inquiry or something like that, you do remember I was with you that afternoon, right? Yeah, underline. You do remember I was with you that afternoon. Okay. I remember. No. In fact, he was not with me on that afternoon. And I think the day before, or that same day perhaps, my mother was there. I remember her and my brothers and sisters. She said he was in Dallas. Well, I didn't really put anything together, but in later on in years, my father went to trial to protect his name from the accusations. Mark Lane, for one, noted JFK investigator, really one of the earliest guys, aside from Sylvia Meager and Bernard Fensterwall. Those guys really the OGs of the whole JFK assassination thing. So much kudos to them. They really started the ball rolling on all this stuff. 6 Seconds from Dallas was Josiah Thompson. Yeah. But in the early 2000s, my father summoned me, and I've been going to visit him every year or two from California to Miami. As a matter of fact, I visited him in Guadalajara when he moved there. And there's a cute little story in Bond of Secrecy where my father, delighted in telling me this story like several times, he goes, you know, Saint, we had a little problem with the neighbor's rooster across the street. Every morning that goddamn rooster would just start blaring and blaring and blaring, and I just said, I got to get rid of that critter. And so he devised this CIA-inspired assassination of the rooster. I'm like, this guy never stops, you know. Got to get rid of this rooster. Okay, how many guys is it going to take? What'd you do, breaking and entering? Did you make it look like suicide? I mean, roosters kill themselves, right?
Drug overdose.
Yeah, feed overdose or something. He was bulimic, I don't know, he was something. Depressed, okay, depressed rooster. Anyways, he told me he had, because the rooster cages were on top of this flat-roofed hacienda right across the street. So my father got his slingshot, or manufactured, or got from the CIA a slingshot, and he had melted some rooster seed feed or whatever and some strychnine into these ice cubes, which he then, after much deliberation and mathematical configurations, if I hold the thing like this and do this, and it's going to land over there. It did. The ice cubes melted, rooster hit the ice cube, end of the rooster. I want some applause for that one. Yeah. Come on. Yeah. That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
As a rooster owner, I'd like to ask if he considered talking to the neighbors.
Are you kidding? Not without his Luger or his over and under.
I've been looking out for ice cubes in my yard now.
Yeah, you better watch that. And so that was humorous. My dad and I, from that point on, developed a really good relationship. We were so close and so tight. And I was so glad that he got rid of that rooster so he could tell me that story. And maybe if he hadn't killed the rooster, we would have never had this common bond, because I hate roosters now. I just hate them. But I eat a lot of chicken, so, you know, that's okay. He called me down to Miami. This was in like 2002, 2003, and he was dying. He'd been in the hospital multiple times for pneumonia, which is a real killer. Once you get it and you're weakened and you don't exercise your lungs, it just gets worse, and you go back and you go back and you go back. 16 times before he died. He was in the emergency room for pneumonia. That's what eventually killed him. He summoned me down, and he goes, I don't have long, son. He had gangrene in his right leg, and he was refusing to get it amputated. He goes, I'm not going to start whittling my body away. I'm just done. I've had a good life. I'm like thinking, okay, you've had a good life. My life's not been that great, but I can't blame you because I'm an adult now. So whatever I do and have done for the last 25 or 30 years has been my own. I'm not here. Whoever's phone that is, I'm definitely not here. Somebody going to answer that? Carl, is that your phone?
It sounds like it's back that way.
Am I hallucinating? Does anybody else hear that? Is this a flashback? What's happening
Hear
here?
what, St. John?
There it is. That was a phone ringing. There was. Thank you. Thank you for that. Checks in the mail. He summoned me down and he goes, there's some very serious things, I don't have long to live, that I'm going to tell you and talk to you about. And one was the assassination of President Kennedy. Now I knew, obviously, from all the books and all the publicity that he was accused of being one of the three tramps. And I certainly say that the old short tramp with the funny looking hat, was he wearing a hat? I can't remember now.
Yeah.
But he was, yeah. Sure looked like my dad. I mean, really, he's got very unusual features in this guy. They did an overlay in this book called Coup d'etat in America by Alan Weberman and Michael Canfield. You laid the clear plexiglass across the picture of my dad, and it had like an etching of the old tramp, and wow, that's my dad. And it's like, I couldn't deny that. But he'd always said, knew nothing about it. Oswald acted alone, and if you believe this fish story, I'll tell you another one about another rooster. He told me that he had advanced knowledge of the assassination of President Kennedy. And I mean, his body was weak, was given out, but his mind was extremely, extremely strong. The guy's mind was like a computer. You could ask him about anything, and he'd have dates, memories, and stuff. So this whole Reagan thing with the Alzheimer's, he wasn't going for that. And he told me he laid out some things for me over the next couple of days, and we made a deal. We had an idea. We needed to bring this to the public because it's important. He said he was a bench warmer in the assassination of President Kennedy. And a bench warmer, and he was very specific about that word, although we were never allowed the time to completely get the story from him. But a bench warmer is someone that's at the game, right? They're on the bench. They're not like in D.C. while the game's going on in Dallas. That's not a bench warmer. A bench warmer is at the football field as the game's going on. So he was there in Dallas. That's the way he told me he was there in Dallas. Now, there's one picture I've seen of a guy with a fedora and a trench coat. Some of you people may have know what picture I'm talking about. He's in the middle of the street. He's probably the only guy wearing a trench coat. Doesn't look like a CIA agent at all. You know, you could have a neon sign on him, CIA. You know, it would be no more obvious. And he told me, you know, the little story, the information about being summoned to a safe house on 2 occasions and discussing the assassination with the team, and that there was another team at the ready in another location in the United States. That must have been the Chicago team, perhaps, or the Tampa team, or something like that. I don't know. He only knew what he knew about it, and he did know about the assassination that was upcoming. He gave me names. He gave me a chain of command in his own hand, and then. Well, we didn't really know what to do with all that information at the time, so I went back to California. I had to go back to my job, and another year or so passed. But during that year, I got a tape from him in the mail, and it outlined that he knew that Lyndon Johnson was a co-conspirator in the assassination of President Kennedy, and that some of the other co-conspirators, he named them as well. David Morales was at the meeting. There was a guy named, who was the psycho with the alcoholic psycho with Harvey. Thank you. All I have to do is say alcoholic and psycho, and people that know go, Bill Harvey. Anyways, yeah, he was a crazy kind of guy, but I guess working for the CIA and doing stuff like that, you might get a little crazy. Anyways, I'm running out of time, but he did outline these many things which I put in my first book, Bond of Secrecy. And my father was going to release this information and fulfill it to its furthest extent while he was alive. But he got under so much pressure from his attorney, who was being handled by William F. Buckley Jr., who has massive CIA connections, to keep my father from going public with this. They said that he was going to be arrested, he was going to be prosecuted even at his advanced age and his declining medical state. And plus, and it was true, it would have ruined his second family. And he knew he already ruined his first family with Watergate. And I respected that and I appreciated that. But he told me, after he passed away, to do, with this information, do what I thought was necessary to bring it to the public. I have to add that my father was not ashamed or felt guilty of any participation or advanced knowledge in the Kennedy assassination. He truly felt that JFK was a security threat to this country, as did just about everybody else in the military-industrial complex. It was the people that loved JFK, the other people in government hated it. And maybe he was a security risk. I really don't know what would have happened if he would have lived, and we would have had an early detente with Russia. Who knows? We would have revealed our alien secrets way back then and all this kind of stuff. But that never came about because they got rid of him. They whacked him. And that's the way the CIA does things. And that was when this country was taken over against its knowledge, against its will. And nothing's ever really been the same since then. And Eisenhower warned us very honestly, very openly. And I'm just, sorry that my father didn't live long enough and wasn't strong enough to bring this information out himself as the plan was. And Kevin Costner, the movie actor, had a hand in that too. He was going to provide my dad with $3 million and all this kind of stuff. This was a whole package deal going on because he wanted to film it. Costner wanted to bring it out. This is all in the Bond of Secrecy book. And my other book is about my mom, Dorothy, how she started out in the OSS and was part of this Treasury Department OSS joint operation to track Nazi gold and currency, art objects stolen from all the countries that they had invaded. And she just led a fabulous life in those days. And it was mixed with a great deal of sadness also. She had a lot of miscarriages, probably because of the stress. And she, anyway, she was just a wonderful woman. She lost her life in the plane crash in Chicago, which I believe was murder. I don't know. I'll never know who gave the orders or whatever. I can't even, guess. So it's an ongoing attempt to find out what happened to her, because I really would like to know, who kind of winked and nodded and said, yeah, this plane can't land, because she was on a plane with CBS anchorwoman, Michelle Clark, and they were going to do a press conference in Chicago the next day, where she was going to, quote, blow the White House out of the water, bring everybody down. She had just had it. I mean, she'd already had it already for months and months and years. This was the final straw. She felt she was the person that was going to save our family, and then they killed her. My dad pled guilty 3 days later, sentenced to 4.5 years, and my life came to an abrupt end for family and that kind of thing. And when I came out with my Bond of Secrecy book, the rest of my family totally, said, well, we begged you not to bring this out. You're no longer part of the Hunt family. And I'm like, well, I thought I was the Hunt family. But I wasn't. And so they have not spoken to me, nor will they ever contact me, despite my many, many attempts over the years to reopen dialogue with my sisters and my stepmother, who was a wonderful teacher from Georgia. They just won't have anything to do with me. And that's the price. So, yeah, my life's been a little confusing and a little difficult, but you have to do what's the right thing to do. And I would do it all over again. I would lose my family, I would lose my mother, if that's what it took to bring me here today to speak to you guys. I would do that all over again. And thanks very much for listening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just need 1 minute. I wrote a letter. I'm sorry. This is going to be something I wanted to read here. I put on Facebook a letter. Some of you know what letter I'm talking about? This is a letter to Caroline Kennedy. And I've just been, this has been eating away at me for a long time, and it's not fair to her. And someone needed to say something, and so I wrote this a week or so ago, put it on Facebook, and the support was just incredible. And it says, "It is with the deepest respect and honesty that I reach out to you. I feel a great deal of sorrow for actions involving my father, which may have led to the death of your father. In 1963, my father, E. Howard Hunt, as a CIA officer, had knowledge of plans to eliminate your father, President John F. Kennedy. I know this because my father confessed this to me shortly before he died. It is a burden I will always carry. I cannot imagine the loss you experienced at such a young age. In the ensuing years, you have carried yourself with great dignity and reserve in the face of ongoing public speculation about your father's death. No one has ever, to my knowledge, offered you any kind of apology for this horrible and unforgivable crime. It seems an insignificant gesture to apologize, but that's all I am able to do. So for what it's worth, I'm deeply regretful for my father's role, whatever it may have been, in the death of your father. I'm so sorry that history has been cruel to your family in ways most of us won't even understand. From the bottom of my heart, I offer this sincere apology and hope that you find it comforting that someone cares enough about you and what you lost to come forward and say, I'm sorry. And I am sorry. And thanks a lot, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank John Hunt.
Thank you. I know what you mean about that.
We'll bring up our next speaker, Douglas Caddy, in 10 minutes.